All right. Hi. So I guess we are live. Yes, attendees are joining in. Let's just give them a quick moment. Yep, people are joining in. Just going to wait till I think, yeah, they're joining pretty fast. Let's wait until at least 50, 60 attendees. Then let's just take off. All right, so I think we are good to begin now. So hello, everyone joining in. Thank you so much for taking our time on Saturday, which is not an ideal day, I know, but that's the best we could do to bring you this diverse set of alumni panelists. So welcome to the Grad School Guidance Talk. This is track 1 MBA, as hotly requested by the alumni community. I'm Mayuk. Thank you so much for joining in, and especially thank you so much to the alumni panelists for joining in here. So we hope that we hope that this session gives you a good idea of how it will be like to approach your MBA application and hopefully bring you closer to your dream school. And yes, so without further ado, let's begin. But before we do that, I just want to give a quick shout out to everyone. So of course, thank you to the panelists, and most importantly, thank you to the Alumni Relations Office for making this happen. They have been providing their invaluable support in making this happen. And yes, so please do help support alumni relations office initiatives. The weekender is happening, for example, pretty soon. So yes, for those of you who can make it to Delhi NCR on the 18th of June, the ARO has a very exciting schedule for the alumni weekender. So please do try to registrations are still open. So please keep an eye out for ARO communications on weekender. Please do join in, and hopefully you'll get to network with fellow enthusiast alumni just like you. And yes, so thank you so much to the ARO for all the support on this. So let me introduce my fellow co-host to you, Deshna Jain, who's here with us. So Deshna, would you like to explain to us the objective for organizing this?
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much for joining in. The objective of the event is to leverage the Ashoka community to answer some key questions that arise as one plans for their grad school, and in this case, it's an MBA. We have panelists who have gone through this process and are here to help you through through their experiences. We'll be covering questions from why an MBA to how to choose your school, how to choose the geography, evaluating your profile, understanding the finances, as well as the pains of the process and the rewards of it eventually. As panelists, we have a wide variety of people. Let's start with Rangoli, who is currently pursuing her MBA from State Business School, Oxford. Then we have Nisha, who is an alumnus of UPenn and Wharton, as well as an admissions counselor. Then we have Ratan, who is currently pursuing his MBA from the Wharton Business School. We have Vanshika, who is currently pursuing her MBA from NCR. We have Tanvi, who completed her MBA from the Indian School of Business. And we have Zafar, who is currently at IIM Kozhikode pursuing his MBA. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. So yeah, without taking much time, let's start with the question. And these questions have been compiled by all the responses that we have gotten through you guys. And we have tried to sort of take all the questions that we could. So yeah, let's start. Mayuk?
All right. Thank you so much, Deshna. So without further ado, let's start. So the first question I think that is pretty obvious for this is to ask why MBA, right? Why you should do an MBA in the first place. So panelists, the first question that I think is on everybody's mind is, what are some valid reasons for pursuing an MBA? What are the circumstances in which you should consider that maybe an MBA is the right move? Or what are the benefits you would get if you choose to go down the MBA rabbit hole?
Mayuk, maybe do you want to call out some people as well for each question? That makes it's a little.
Yeah, sure.
Sure, Ratan. So I guess you can start in that case. And I think I can take Tanvi. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So Ratan and Tanvi. Ratan, you have the mic.
Okay, awesome. So thanks for organizing this. I'll quickly jump to the answer. So there are no right or wrong reasons. There are good and bad reasons possibly. And I think I'm I'm still figuring out if my reasons were good enough, especially given what happened last year. But I think definitely there are good reasons which could be, say, about joining a consulting firm or an investment bank or a financial institution. If you come from a VC, a PE background, if you're looking for a jump in your career, then doing an MBA is a good reason. And I've also come to realize that if you want to shift geography and if you want to work in name brand, well-established firms, corporates, at least in the medium term almost, then this is a good reason as well. Unless you have very good scholarship, which is not very common, entrepreneurial venture might not be a great idea. Because there are so many restrictions on internationals, and with the amount of loan that you might be taking further risk becomes a little difficult, at least in the short term. In the long term, of course, everyone is dead, so you can do whatever you want. But in the short term, as it at least for 4 to 5 years period, that might be a constraint. Then doing it for without having a very clear idea about what you want to get out of those 2 years. By very clear, I mean 60-70%, you know directionally where you want to go. Without having that, just for the sake of getting another degree, maybe then it's not a great idea, because you may not be able to utilize your time effectively, and there's very high likelihood that the FOMO is very, very strong in most of these programs. So unless you have a solid foundation as to why you are there, it might become difficult to just figure out why you are there in a way, and then figure out what to do and how to use these 2 years. The other reason why, other reasons are probably, maybe I'll say, if you want to work in social sector, non-profit specifically, and that's all you want to do. You do not want to have private, as in have corporate as an option if needed, at least, unless again you are on a full ride or a full scholarship. Getting into a social sector is possibly also not it's not probably a great idea to an MBA. Though you can still argue that you can join with Spans and Dalbergs of the world, but I don't know how true it is, how applicable that is for international students. So I'll just pause here, but yeah, moving on to Tanvi, I think.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ratan. I think most of the reasons Ratan has already covered, but I think the number one reason that people want to go for an MBA is switching careers. But I would say that there is a limitation of experience that comes into picture there as well. Like if you have like 9-10 years of experience in particular industry doing particular kind of role, then switching into another career also becomes pretty hard, even after an MBA. So, but definitely it is possible. And like it keeps like people coming from tech, they want to switch into consulting or product management, then MBA becomes a good way to switch into those kind of careers. So second reason, like Ratan mentioned, is, switching. If you want to, like there are 3 kind of switches that you can take in the industry, the geography, and the role. So for some MBA programs, like it is possible. All kind of switches is not that easy. But if you are lucky enough, then and you put into like the geography as well, the industry, and the role, and like for some consulting people, they want to go go into seniority position to do an MBA. So these are some of the reasons, but some like people, they just want to do it for a career break. But I don't think that is a good enough reason to invest so much money into a program like MBA, which are generally an expensive program, unless you have a scholarship. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, guys. Like those were incredibly detailed answers. The incredibly detailed answers, and like we also got a good reason as to why not to do an MBA. Like, so thank you so much, Ratan, for that. So how would an MBA differ from, say, other graduate degrees or certifications which are like, around business? So like I think there are postgraduate diplomas in management and some other programs as well that offer some sort of like a management education experience. So how would an MBA largely differ from that? Vanshika, Zafar, would you like to answer?
And maybe Nisha as well, because she has.
Yes, and Nisha. But Vanshika, you're on mute. Please unmute.
Right. I think from what I know from other degrees that exist, one of them, for example, at INSEAD is MIMs. Now, two factors that vary between an MBA and other programs is the age. At what stage of your career are you doing that program? MBAs usually, depending on where you do it, cater to a population with much more experience as opposed to other degrees. I'm not talking about executive MBAs here, of course, because of the audience that we're talking to is relatively younger. And the second thing is, how are these degrees known? Also, I've noticed MBAs are a pretty well-known degree. People understand what it is when you're applying for jobs. A lot of other degrees, I would say people still don't have full comprehension about. If you go somewhere with an MIM degree, people don't know what that is. So from that perspective, it might be a disadvantage. But in terms of what you learn, context, I'm not quite sure because I don't know content-wise what is included in those degrees. I would say content-wise, it's pretty much the same what you learn in an MBA. The difference is the kind of colleagues you're interacting with, the experience that they have, and all of that. But if anybody has more information about these other courses, feel free to add.
Thank you, Vanshika. Zafar.
So within India, I think a lot of these programs that you refer to, they're called by different names, but as long as it's a 2-year program, it's essentially an MBA. And the curriculum is largely the same. And I don't see any significant differences between these programs. So if you're looking to do an MBA inside India, I'd strongly recommend that you don't go outside of the top 6 IIMs, and maybe the top 2 or 3 private business schools that are there. This is excluding ISB, of course, because that is a 1-year program, which is different. It's not, I think, recognized by the UGC and whatnot. But if that floats your boat, great. But as far as conventional 2-year programs are concerned, any of these top colleges, top 10, let's say, would be largely fine. Yeah.
Thank you, Zafar. Nisha, can you come in?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me, first of all. Secondly, just coming to your question, so like different business schools also offer programs like Masters of Business Analytics, in addition to what Vanshika mentioned with the MIMs. And, of course, the MIMs was like vis-a-vis the MBA program, while, I mean, curricular-wise, it would be quite similar, but in terms of at least networking opportunities, recruitment opportunities vary greatly because the expectations from prospective MIM candidates versus a prospective MBA candidates also vary quite a bit in terms of the clarity that one needs to have on what their career goals are and why they seek to pursue an MBA. And this ties into the previous question that was asked as well, like why would one want to pursue an MBA? And as a partner at a top ranked admissions consulting firm, the most common answer that I come across is, for networking and for exposure. And while that's a great personal reason, that's not the right answer from the perspective of the application also, but I know you're going to come to that a little later. So I'll be happy to, elaborate on that next. But just in terms of using the MBA as a bridge to, get to our career goals instead of advance our career goals, particularly like Tanvi also mentioned and Ratan also mentioned, to either make a career switch or let's say climb up the corporate ladder within the same field that you're in. An MBA works great, whereas an MIM is often the best option for young, like fresh undergraduates who've just received their degrees and are actually seeking exposure to the wider world and haven't had that kind of exposure earlier on in their careers. But somewhere a word of caution, if you are pursuing programs like, let's say, a Masters of Business Analytics or MIMs, you have to be very strategic about the kind of course that you choose, because that can affect your chances of getting into a top ranked MBA program a few years down the line. So one has to be really careful about, do I really want to go now? And sometimes I speak to candidates, who are desperate to leave the country because of personal reasons, because they really want to just get out of their homes or, take a break from India, and they want to experience the world abroad for programs abroad and international programs. But does it really fit into their grand scheme of things and in their careers? That's something which one really has to spend quite a bit of time thinking about.
All right, thank you, Nisha. Zafar, you wanted to add something, I believe.
Just wanted to know, add a point that a lot of these colleges within India might offer programs such as IIM Kozhikode offers something called the PGP in Liberal Studies and Management. There's also a PGP Finance. So in these cases, I would strongly recommend that you go with a flagship program of these colleges, because a lot of these colleges, government and private, are trying to increase their student count. So they're introducing new programs. The problem with these is, while the course may, the subjects and the coursework may be fun and whatnot, may align to what they're claiming in the brochure, the number one reason for doing an MBA within India is just to get a salary increase and placements. And these programs don't necessarily always have the same level of placements as the flagship program of these colleges do. So just be careful when you're choosing programs that are not the flagship program offered by the institute that you're targeting.
Thank you so much, Zafar. Before I pass the mic to Deshna, just a reminder to the panelists, like if you use the raise hand option, please do not lower the hand by yourself, because then like we might miss it by chance. So just allow us to lower the hand. You can just click on raise hand once and let it get up. Deshna?
Yeah. So the next section, we will talk about choosing geographies. So basically, how does one differentiate between doing an MBA in India or choosing other geographies like US, Canada, Europe, etc.? And how did you make a choice with respect to perhaps the academic quality, the networking opportunities, job opportunities, and other personal reasons you might have had? Rangoli, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me as well. So I think, I mean, I think you've listed out some of the key reasons why one might, prefer one geography over another. Talking a little bit sort of about the program that I'll be doing. So this is a one-year MBA program, which is the case for most of Europe, except for maybe INSEAD and LBS. Not the case for US, not the case for India, where, you have 2-year MBA programs. So what that does is, especially if you're thinking of going abroad, right, your cost doubles if you're looking at a 2-year program versus a 1-year program. So for me, that was one of the key factors. The second biggest thing is obviously, post MBA employment opportunities. So I don't need to tell you the way the job market looks in the US and the amount of security you have. If you're sort of an international student who's then looking to get a job. The UK offers a 2-year graduate visa to people who've completed 1-year programs, which was, again, the second biggest reason for me to pick the UK over the US. And the third thing, I think this is specific to people who are looking for MBA and similar programs in Europe, is language. Right. So France has a lot of great schools. Spain has a lot of great schools. But, when it comes to recruitment time, obviously someone who speaks the language is going to be much preferred than, people who don't. So if you're coming from India, if, you speak English and you speak whatever sort of your local languages, what that means is you are competing with everybody who did an MBA from the UK, because that's where the jobs are. That's where the English speaking jobs are. Right. And in that case, it's just easier for companies to pick people who have sort of the opportunity to work in the UK without the need for them to sponsor your visa right off the bat, right? So all those things together, one, make it easier for you to get a job and to stay there, and also make you a little bit more attractive to the kind of companies that, you'll be looking to get placed in after. So I think those are the top, my top 3 reasons. But if you have sort of specific, issues that you'd like me to delve into deeper, happy to do that.
Yeah, Vanshika, you're next.
Yeah. One of the things to also keep in mind is, when it comes to choosing geographies, is a little long-term thinking on where you want to be 10 years down the line. Maybe you want an immediate job somewhere outside, but if you're looking to come back to India, you might have to think about choosing a B school which has a good network in India, if that's a criteria. So yeah, I'd like to add that. So both short-term and long-term plans, and you have to prioritize which one matters more to you. That's that. And another thing, and what Rangoli said about the language thing, is a very legit concern and should be a criteria. But also, you should thinking about the diversity and the kind of people. So for example, one of my reasons for choosing INSEAD was that it did the diversity that exists at INSEAD is unlike any other school I've seen or heard. So if you're looking at a more international career, if you're looking to work across, eventually, if you plan to work across geographies and all of that, it definitely does add an element of cultural awareness that makes it very easy for you to accommodate to different cultures. So that's, I wouldn't say that should be a top priority, but just a thing to keep in mind. And yeah, and also geography could be your top criteria, but then you always have to take the decision on geography based on other elements as well, which means, is it a 1-year MBA? Is it a 2-year MBA? If I want to go to the US, but US doesn't have an option for a good 1-year MBA, then I'll have to go to somewhere in the UK or Europe. So that's another thing to look at.
Thank you.
That's it.
I would ask Tanvi to answer this question, given she has had an admit from Oxford as well, and she chose ISB. Was geography one of the reasons that you did that?
So it was more complicated than that. It was a COVID year. And since the last year program at Oxford was also mostly online, so that was also one of the factors that I took into consideration while making that decision. But other than that, like you have to look, like the other panelists said, that where you want to be. And in long term, I saw myself working in India. And what I know about ISB is that it has a strong alumni network, which is quite helpful. So, and the factor was also scholarship. Since I didn't have a scholarship from Oxford to pursue that program, that also became one of the considerations for me to, like, because the cost was double. And I talked to the alumni of the both programs, and what I realized at that time that many people coming from the European programs as well, they come back to India. So, so all these factors got into the consideration. And one of the major factors was my personal reason to stay in India, and that was my vision of my long-term career. So that was a major factor.
Thank you for answering, Tanvi. Ratan, would you want to pitch in now on why
Sure.
US?
Sure. So unlike other panelists, I wanted to get a 2-year experience because I wanted a little more leeway to experiment with some areas, also being able to spend some time in taking courses which I like. I do not have a business background before this. So thought might be helpful to take some courses and actually spend some time, maybe take some electives as well next year and see what I want to go, which direction I want to take. And the other thing is internships. I think you get an option to try something out at the end of the first year in the summers, and you can always pivot in the second year, though probably the market is not very suited for that right now. But in general, if you aim for next 1 or 2 years in terms of joining the program, I think you will have an option to do some sort of experimenting and pivoting. So that and then I was very clear about joining only the top probably 5 or 7 MBAs, and I got into top 3 in the US, which was nice. But if this hadn't worked out like this, I'm not sure if I would recommend considering anything which is beyond top 7 in the US, because it's a very expensive degree. The cost is pretty much the same across the board, but the outcomes vary significantly. So I think to what Zafar was mentioning earlier about Indian MBAs going for only top 6, pretty much the same thing will apply to the US as well. And then I think, I mean, as compared to say Canada or some other geographies, US, especially I think both East and the West Coast have decent support in terms of having a lot of folks from South Asia and India. So, I mean, I had a couple of my cousins who were here, so it felt like there's some support system if I want to stay here for a few years. And then, sorry, yeah. Yeah, the last factor was my spouse's situation. I mean, she also got an opportunity in the US. She is not a business major. She's a journalist, in fact, and that's a very different field of work. So US and India happen to have this thing called Fulbright program, and it worked out fine for us. So yeah, broadly, those are the factors.
Yeah, I just had a cross question because some of the people who filled the form asked this. So when you say that not top, nothing beyond the top 8 B schools or top 7 B schools, Do you think it stands true for someone who wants to live a life in the US? Or versus in your situation where I perhaps know you personally that you perhaps want to come back to India, right, after some time. So one of the reasons why you chose the top schools was you might get that network there here in India after you come back, right? But
Yeah.
for people who want to stay in the US, do you think anything beyond the top 8 schools also would help them?
I think if the market was like it was in 2021 or 2022, probably yes. But for the next couple of years, there's too much uncertainty, and I mean, putting it too much money. If you get some scholarship, yes, you can consider that. But what I'm referring to here is what amount of risk is appropriate to take right now. And as you go to schools which are not very well reputed, especially for international students, getting a good job and being able to pay back that loan in maybe next 3 years, those considerations start playing up. So yeah, I mean, if you want to immigrate to the US, stay here for 15-20 years, probably you can consider it. But still, given that you're an international, you probably will have 3 years, 1 of OPT and 2 of CPT. Keep that time frame in mind. If does not work out, if you do not find an employer who wants to give you to sponsor your visa, I mean, there is a risk involved. There is what I'm referring to. Yeah.
Right, sure, thank you. Nisha, would you want to pitch in here and tell us, because you might have seen students going to different B schools of different rankings, right? And you might now know what are the job opportunities that they are discovering right now. Do you want to pitch in here?
Sure. So I think I agree with what Ratan has said, but I also want to present a flip side to that argument, because I think different schools fit people with different profiles and different preferences. So when one wants to apply to a school, not everyone will have a profile or be sort of aligned to the idea of applying to courses that are offered only by the M7 schools. And while we do work with students who primarily want to apply to those schools, there is value in considering programs from the top 10 or top 15 schools as well, because of other factors, for example, cultural fit, having family around, and just, like cost of living in certain cities as well. So, and also specialized programs which are offered only at particular schools, which are more tech driven perhaps, versus the more mainstream programs offered by the M7. So I think to each their own really, but at the end of the day, it should be worth your while and worth your dollar to actually go for an MBA program. And if that's not serving your purpose in the long run, then it's probably not a wise decision that you've made. So I think a lot of factors go into sort of not just where you want to be, but also what you actually want to get out of the 2-year program or the 1-year program. So again, having clarity about your goals, and this is something we spend a lot of time on in the application process as well, is to really flesh out the long-term career goal, to see why you really want to pursue the MBA, because it is a huge investment of time, money, and energy. And unless you have that clarity, it becomes very difficult for you to actually make the most out of it. And of course, while you're in the program, wherever you are, like whether in the top 15, top 10, or top 7, networking, is key, and really figuring out, what works for you, and really understanding yourself and sort of what, it makes you tick really is going to be a huge challenge. So it should be worth your while in many ways.
Thank you so much, Nisha. We'll now start with the next set of questions. Mayu, could you take it over?
Yes, thank you, Deshna. So next up, now that we have factored in why you should not MBA, I think the general reason we are all here is more or less, we had decided to go down the MBA rabbit hole. So should you choose to do so, which I think a lot of people might still, how do you choose your school? So panelists, how did you do your homework in selecting your schools? What all factors did you consider? What networks did you reach out to? Did you utilize alumni? Did you talk to admissions committee at colleges, etc.? So Rangoli, can you weigh in, since I believe you have a slightly more unorthodox path to an MBA?
That is a bit of an understatement. So I think for me, it really was one, to Nisha's point, it was about fit, right? My long-term goal is to stay in social impact. And Oxford is, one of the best programs for that. As is, I think, Yale's program as well. So for me, fit was number one. Second, I happened to know a lot of people who had graduated from side business school in the last couple of years. And I saw sort of what they were doing, where they were doing, and how sort of Oxford helped get them there, right? Without it, I don't know if they would have had the opportunities that they needed to get to where they were. And those, I think, were the top two considerations that I had. I was also fortunate to know some of the faculty that taught there. So that, gives you really crucial insight into the curriculum side of things, because yes, business school is, your network and opportunities outside of class, but also I think the way that Oxford curriculum works is it does integrate sort of social impact and responsible leadership into the curriculum sort of from the ground up, right? So both inside and outside class, I'm getting opportunities that are very, very relevant to my short, medium, and long-term goals. And the combination, I think, of those three things was what sort of sealed it, what sort of made Oxford my top choice. And the second one was quite a bit, I think, below for me.
Thank you. Vanshika, can you come in? How did you do your homework around choosing schools?
So I was looking at, I did it after a few years of experience, 7 years of experience. I was very wary of doing a 2-year MBA. I was not in a state to study for 2 years. So that was a huge factor in me going for the European business schools. And then I did have a safety school in the US. I applied to this school called Kelly. It's in Indiana. So I thought, just in case, if I don't get through NCAD, I'll apply. I'll maybe go to. Another good thing about safety schools and why you should also maybe apply to more than M7 schools is they give really good scholarships. You have a much higher chance of getting a great scholarship. So yeah, for me, it was just how much time do I want to spend at the MBA? And then maybe Europe was a little bit of a factor too. The fact that I'll get to, by the way, this can also be a legit reason, guys, if you're thinking about what kind of a geography would you like to live in. So that can also be, you can have personal reasons as well. So yeah, so it was just that. For me, it was the duration of the course. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Vanshika. Tanvi, would you like to add in, from the Indian point of view?
I mean, I did attend some AdCom sessions that used to happen, and I think the number one reason, I did look at the schools in US, in Europe before applying. I think I was also working in social impact space before going for an MBA, and I also wanted to, apply into the programs which are either, have some focus on sustainability or social impact. So that made me, apply to Oxford and a couple of other programs. I think other factors can be, there are schools which are known for particular specialization. For example, I think in US, Wharton is known for finance, for example, and there are schools for example, Oxford is known for social impact focused. People coming from this background do apply to Oxford. But if you don't have that kind of consideration, I mean, if you want to end up in consulting, I know that ISB is known for as a consulting school as well. And NCR, for example, also known for great jobs in consulting. So that can also be one factor that you can take into consideration. Second factor can be your GMAT score as well, like how much score you get. Generally, US schools demand for higher GMAT score than European or even say Indian schools as well. So it can be the geography that you want to end up, the kind of specialization that school is known for, and you should select for there can be three kind of categories. One is the top category that you have, the aspirational kind of schools. The second can be your safe options. I think you should apply to to a combination of schools from both categories.
All right. Nisha, since you raised your hand, like, would you come in, please?
Yeah. So just to add to what other panelists have said, I think one of the biggest factors which is often underrated is the fit for culture. So I know I'm using the word fit again, but just about in terms of is the school a good cultural fit for you? And that's something which one discovers organically through the process. When you sort of have numerous conversations with not just current students, but also alumni and members of the admissions office also, to see whether or not you will fit with the vibe and if you really enjoy the vibe on campus. And I've often had candidates who, after speaking to, let's say, 7 or 8 alumni, have said this school doesn't work for me because I don't think I'll be a good fit within the school environment. So apart from other factors like career goals and what the school is best known for, what are its flagship concentrations, I think culture is a huge part of the evaluation process as well.
Nisha, thank you. Since we still have some time for next session, Ratan, can you please come in?
Yeah, just a very quick comment. I think I did a very bad job at doing research, despite having decent amount of time to do that. And it's I don't know if it's an Indian mindset thing that you apply for a school and you get in or get rejected. I think that's not how it should work. That's not how it works. There's a wide variety. To Nisha's point, there are different flavors at different schools. You should speak with at least 3 to 4 people. If you have the visa, go visit that place. That this investment is definitely worth it, because you're potentially going to spend 2 or probably more years, but you'll definitely be with the folks who are in that year, and will definitely be, I mean, that flavor will have a big impact on your life. You do more research in general, talk to people. I think just reach out on LinkedIn or ask maybe one of us or some of us to connect with people, and do more research. Don't just focus on your essays and GMAT. Actually get to understand what that place is like.
Thank you so much, Ratan. Deshna?
Yeah, so our next section is about evaluation of profile. And believe me, we got the most questions from here. Basically how to review a profile to understand what are your chances in different schools, and how to understand those gaps then and build your profile. We have people who have 1 year of work ex, 5 years of work ex, who want to understand in these sort of the number of years that are remaining, how can they build their profile to sort of go to their dream school. So yeah, this is the question, and perhaps I'll ask Nisha, the admissions counselor herself, to answer this first.
Okay, so there are a bunch of factors that we look at, when reviewing resumes and sort of guiding students on what to do with the time that they have. Sometimes we have candidates, sort of coming to us a little earlier on in the process with about 1 to 2 years before they actually apply to B school. And we also have candidates who are, pushing us within the same year. And again, so we've seen a trend shift in the past couple of years in the way that admissions officers are reviewing applications and what they prioritize amongst candidates. So of course, high GMAT scores, high GPAs. If you don't have that, an explanation for a lower GPA, for example, but definitely a higher GMAT score is something that you would need if you are applying to a top-ranked MBA program. But beyond that, like I was saying, there has been a shift in terms of the conventional jobs, pre-MBA jobs that candidates have to be enrolled in, given what the scenario was even 5 years ago. So for example, in every B school class, you have about 1,000 consultants apply, from the top tier consulting firms who've had at least, 3 years pre-MBA experience. But recently, especially with the pandemic, we are seeing a shift and in terms of preference for adcoms to choose candidates who have, let's say, after 2 years of consulting experience, for example, which is more conventional, have shift to a more, let's say, social impact oriented role, or let's say a private equity, experience, or a VC experience, or even an entrepreneurial experience. And it doesn't matter if you fail. I mean, that makes for an even more interesting story. But the idea really is that, what learnings have you grasped, or what, lessons have you learned from that failure? And, how have you used that insight to kind of chart your career path? So again, what you've done prior to applying to a B school really comes down to how are you using that to sort of, build your own trajectory going forward, and how are you connecting that to your career goals, and how does the B school just become a bridge towards achieving your career goals? So it's not the end all be all, and desperation is something that definitely one should steer clear from, like during the application process. You really, to sort of bring that kind of conviction, in terms of why you belong at that school, you really have to, again, like Ratan was saying, and everybody else was also saying, spend enough time speaking to people to really understand that the school will actually get you to where you want to be, which means that, networking with like-minded people helps you understand and introspect on whether this school actually works for you. But, we've seen candidates with, conventional pre-MBA backgrounds, lower GPAs, also making it, as long as they have clarity about what they want to do next and how the school will help. So you might not necessarily have that at the beginning of the process, but it's important to spend, a good amount of time, at least 5 to 6 months, organically working through what the sort of offerings are of that particular school, especially in terms of 3 buckets, which are really your academic resources in terms of the courses that the school offers, the experiential activities, which really helps bridge theory and practice, beyond the classroom, for example, conferences, or, any kind of career-related offerings that the school may have. And thirdly is extracurricular activities, like, would you want to start something on campus, and really how would you contribute to that particular school, given what your career goals are? So it becomes sort of a symbiotic relationship of, what do you bring to the table in terms of what you're going to contribute, but also what are you going to take away in terms of how is that school going to help you achieve what you want to accomplish in the future.
Thank you so much, Nisha.
Sure.
So there's one more pertinent question, that how does a college GPA, college branding, work experience, perhaps a social impact experience has an impact on your profile, right? All of you have applied to these schools, and perhaps you might have had a low GPA, which you might have compensated through something else. What are such tips and tricks that are required in this process? Anyone who wants to pitch in, please.
Maybe I'll just add one more point here. I think everything that Nisha said makes a lot of sense. Just adding one almost element, in fact, 2 elements. One is just the personal narrative that you have. I think Nisha was talking about that as well, in terms of you being very clear about why you are there, what is it that you can contribute, and how is an MBA playing a role in your larger life narrative. So having a decent amount of clarity, at least by the time you're writing your essays, with respect to the narrative arc of your life, almost, is important. The second thing is, if you have a personal story which is about a lot of resilience. If you come from a difficult, let's say, childhood, youth, family, say an area within India which is generally difficult to grow up in, or if you have some very inspiring stories where you've overcome challenges, that kind of storytelling also is something that you should bring to the fore. And I think as you go through the essay writing process, a lot of it is about introspection and being able to really be, let's say, 15-20% more vulnerable, as Dwight would say, and really talk about some of those elements in your life journey. Many of us have those. In fact, almost all of us will have those elements. But how can you tease them out? How can you derive meaning from failures or from difficult experiences? Is an important element as well.
The question about perhaps your college GPA or branding for work experience, anyone would like to answer that? Anyone who felt like this is a gap in their profile and they sort of work towards it by compensating it through something?
I'd be happy to answer that. So, often, again, candidates feel that it is a barrier if you have a low GPA, because unfortunately you can't go back in time, especially for candidates who have at least 3 to 4 years of experience. You can't go back in time and reverse that. And while there are ways to sort of, compensate that, for example, micromasters programs that students enroll in, or let's say retake their GMAT and get a very high score to kind of prove their quantitative and qualitative rigor as well. Of course, one aspect is that you must explain a lower GPA, so anything below 7.5 should be explained on the application. And often it comes down to certain adversities that students have faced during their collegiate years, which have contributed towards a lower GPA. So you must take the opportunity in the additional information section to explain a low GPA. That's really important. I just want to add one thing that, yes, while the application essays are all about, the art of storytelling and really figuring out, like Ratan was saying, the nuances of what makes you, you. We also work with a lot of candidates who come from consulting backgrounds, who've, worked, let's say, 3 years at Bain or BCG or McKinsey, and have had a very diverse exposure, but haven't really built that depth. And often what happens is that, consultants often, struggle with, let's say, sort of crafting their goals because they've worked across diverse industries and they don't really know what, they're the most passionate about. So even if you haven't had some kind of a, let's say, like a very life defining moment or, a story that's extremely, transformational personally for you, there are still ways of positioning your essays in terms of what problems you see in the world around you and how you are equipped with the skills and the know-how to solve those problems. But there are certain gaps in your understanding and your knowledge, which is why you need the MBA to help bridge those gaps in your skills and your industry specific or industry relevant skills which you want to bridge, which is why you're going for the MBA. So it's not that if you've just had a very significant life story but you make it to those top schools, it's also about what you've observed in the world around you and how can you contribute towards it, which is why the schools want you also. It could be another reason.
The only thing I'd like to add to that, sorry, I forgot to raise my hand, is when you're looking at a problem that you'd like to solve or an impact that you'd like to make, you have to be careful about having some proof of having done that in the past. You can't just come from a place where you're saying, okay, this is a problem that I've observed and I'd like to solve, and these are the gaps I want to fulfill. Because what have you done in the past? You picked a problem and now you want to solve it, but what have you done in the past? And everybody who we're talking to at Ashoka has something that they can talk about, and then maybe bring an angle of how that experience is relevant to this. But always don't pick a problem from in isolation and then say, okay, this is now what I want to get to next, unless it's very aspirational and nobody else has ever thought of solving that particular problem. Yeah, just have some proof to back up your claims. That's all.
Just to add to what Vanshika was saying, also it is about building credibility, right? So again, coming back to your career goals, what credibility have you built around your prospective career goals? I mean, what, again, like she's saying, what past experience do you have? And it doesn't have to be full-fledged experience, which connects directly to what you want to do in the future. Otherwise, you won't be going for the MBA in the first place. But at least have you had some exposure towards this problem or the solution that you want to build out? And often, sometimes, like candidates, especially who want to pitch, let's say, an entrepreneurial goal in the future, have been, let's say, piloting their own venture on the side while working full-time for, like a different organization. So it could be, I mean, like your credibility could be something like, even being exposed to, let's say, your father's business, for example, or it could be something which you're doing on the side, or it could be something, let's say, working as part of an employee resource group at your organization and volunteering somewhere. So credibility can take different forms, but yes, that is extremely important to demonstrate.
Right, that was very useful. Thank you so much, Michelle. One more question that people asked is about social impact and what role does it play in profiling? There are people who perhaps join a social impact firm to sort of give their profile a weightage, or perhaps join an NGO. And what, according to you, has the social impact experience played in your profile? Anyone who would want to answer? Rangoli, Ratan, Tanvi, all of you have been in the social impact.
Sure, happy to take that question. I think see, what we've all sort of been dancing around is that you have to be authentic, right? So if you're doing a social impact thing on the side, or you're doing it because it looked good on your CV, like the admissions committee, very smart, very accomplished people, they'll figure it out, right? So you don't have to be saving the world on any scale for it to be sort of an essential part of making yourself a good candidate. If that is where you're contributing best at this stage, given experiences and knowledge and whatever else that you have, then do it. But doing it for the sake of doing it because it'll look good on your resume is honestly, it's a bad reason to do it. Don't do it for that reason, right? For me, I sort of noticed this a bit retroactively, that I had only worked in social impact in very, very like diverse spaces. So I worked in diversity consulting, I work diversity and inclusion consulting, I worked in behavior science. Right now I work in elder care. So sort of very, very different things. And it might be sort of, it takes a little bit of work to connect those dots, right? But the line that does connect them is social impact, because I am looking at sort of solving problems of social relevance at scale and with speed. And that's my MBA story, right? That's the story that is authentic. And that's the story that worked for me. But it didn't work for me because I said, you know what, this is going to look great on an Oxford application. It worked because that's what I want to do. So there are different ways of talking about what you're doing, what you're passionate about. And that is the only way to bring authenticity. That is, I think, the only way to stand out. Because if it's just, I work in social impact, so do a bunch of other people. That doesn't make you special. Like what you're doing, that's what makes a difference.
Thank you so much, Ramya. Anyone else who would like to pitch in before we move to the next section?
Yeah, so I think social impact sort of can take two different forms. So, we've got candidates who are doing it for a living, right? And are working for firms like Samagra or Chai or the Clinton Health Access Initiative, amongst many other firms as well. And of course, what they're doing currently professionally does tie into their long-term career goals, which is why it's making sense for them to do it right now. And you have to take that as part of your story. But like Rangoli is saying, again, it is a matter of authenticity, right? If you're, let's say, working at Ford, for example, but you're doing something outside of Ford and let's say at Ford, you're working for, like designing autonomous vehicles. And outside of work, you are working on projects or innovating projects to promote social inclusion, for example. So that becomes social impact in its own way, but then you also find a way of using that extracurricular activity to build your story and drive home the point about your career goals and really make it convincing for the reader, right? So like you are doing something at work, which is related to AV, but then outside of work, you're also doing something to again, promote diversity in different ways. And therefore, let's say what you want to do in the future is linked to like designing or having your own company to design driven cars, then that makes so much sense because what you're doing outside of work really ties in well with what you're doing at work. So I think social impact, if you're doing it and if you have some time before your MBA application, then design it strategically so that you can actually use it to justify your career goals. Don't just do it for the heck of it because it looks good. It won't look good, like Rangoli said.
Thank you so much. Tanvi, do you want to pitch in?
Yeah, so I would also add one more point that the MBA schools are also increasingly valuing the conscious people, like the socially or the environmentally conscious people who are not just, top performers in their jobs. They are not just, great techies or great consulting people. They also care about, like how they can bring something good through their work, either for climate or either for other people. So so that also becomes one factor that I, like when I was doing my research, that sometimes in top MBA programs, they reject people if they are not, like they are great performers in their corporate careers, but they don't seem to be conscious people. They don't seem to be to have that social consciousness. So that also becomes one of the factor of, that social impact becomes that proof that, you do care about the giving back to the society, or, if you can do some good through that, through your skills, through your career.
Right. Ratan, please go ahead.
So one quick point, just read about, especially this is true for the US for sure, probably for UK and European markets as well. Read a little bit about ESG and DI. I did not understand these terminologies, but the language that they use is, you can find it if you read more about DST and DI. This is, I think all firms have somebody, at least they have policies, like all brand name firms or pretty much any firm which has a good name in the US has something to do with either an ESG office or a DI office or a policy and so on, and people go through those trainings as well. So it's an expectation that you will have some idea about what inclusion, diversity, environment, etc. is, and if not, yeah, you will be trained in that.
Thank you. So being genuine is the answer here. We'll go to the next section. Mayur, please take it over.
Thank you, Deshna. But before I start the next session, Nisha has an important point, particularly considering the audience, which is undergraduates and YF. So, Nisha, would you like to talk about it?
Sure, thanks, Mayuk. So just to sort of elaborate the point about extracurriculars and social impact, since we have a lot of undergrads and YFs here, the popularity of deferred MBA programs, particularly in the US, has been increasing year on year. And that's a great way of just securing your spot at an M7 program in the US before you even graduate from the program. So this is, available to students who are in the final year of undergraduate or master's degrees. And the applications are, deadlines are usually in the April of your last year. So in terms of how do you bring in social impact again to your applications, again, like Ratan is saying, you could look at DEI initiatives, which is basically like, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, or environmental initiatives under the ESG umbrella, to really see how you can build scale in terms of your contributions to the community around you. And since the next deferred MBA deadline is quite a few months away, you have that much amount of time to really, let's say, launch an extracurricular activity or initiative, which puts you in a leadership role, but also allows you to contribute to the community around you. Again, be very conscious about the kind of cause you choose, because that should again tie in with your career goals that you're going to be pitching on the application. So it shouldn't be that it's at odds with what you want to do in the future, or it doesn't complement what career goals you are pitching. So if you are choosing, to engage in social impact or any kind of extracurricular, make sure that you build it up organically again, but also build the scale required to demonstrate your own, sort of investment in the cause, so that it actually makes a difference on your application for next year.
Right. I had just one question, Nisha. So Tanvi highlighted how some B schools, they want people who are just not good at the work, but also want to give back to the society, right? Do you think this is echoed around these schools of different geographies, first? And second is, I understand that we discussed the ways through which we can perhaps make a profile through a social impact career or extracurriculars, but is it really necessary? If a profile is perhaps just a straight profile of sales, say, for example, who just want to do well in their job and don't want to do social impact, is that okay? Or should they forcefully do it so that their profile is better and they can get to a B school?
So I think I don't think it's necessary to do social impact, and my definition of social impact might be different from yours. So what it looks like for me might be different from what it looks like for you. So let's say if you're working in sales, for example, one of the best ways to think about it and develop a framework for yourself is actually to see that, okay, am I really using my core strengths or my core area of interest, which like professional interest, to make a difference outside of my work, right? So I might be in sales at work, but let's say, am I maybe creating a financial literacy program or developing, let's say, do I have a micro entrepreneurship support group to help, let's say, local street vendors in my community, increase their sales? Or am I helping build direct to consumer access for the local vendors in my community? So it's not that I'm deviating from sales, I'm just doing it from, for a different demographic or a group of people, outside of work. So yes, it is important for the application for them to see you do something outside of work. And some B schools, for example, Booth has an entire essay question on who are you outside of work. So if you haven't done anything outside of work, which is concrete, which positions you as a responsible like citizen of your society, then it might come across as being too one-dimensional, because again, it's also a question about, would the school enjoy having you as part of their community? So if you are presenting yourself as being too, like one-dimensional, that answer might be no. So find something that makes you tick, but it can definitely and should connect to what you're doing at work. So whatever you're excelling in at work, you can easily apply that to solving a related problem outside of work to sort of make it interesting for yourself also, but also appealing to the AdCom.
Right. Vanshika, I'm sorry, we are sort of out of time. We'll have to go to the next section. If you can complete it in 1 or 2 minutes, that would be great. Yeah.
I can. I just wanted to say that not to be discouraged if you are working in corporate and you don't have a social impact experience. Oftentimes, for example, if you're in sales, there might be an ethical situation that you faced, right? And there you showed up as a good person. Just be a likable human being. And often you can pick up stories from your regular work as well. So think about challenges that you face when it comes to people in society. So you don't have to lose hope that you haven't done anything for the community or socially, and then you can't apply it. So just think about it a little. just be a likable person. That's important too. That's it. I'm done.
All right. Thank you so much, Vanshika. So next up, like the most important question, I think more than even the application, I think people fear this, particularly finances, right? MBA is a very expensive degree and you have to figure out how to finance it and of course, how to pay it back as well. So financial consideration is key. So of course, the question like that would come to mind here is like, based on the program's location, what all financial considerations should be taken into account? Now, of course, like, like this question would like largely apply to like foreign programs particularly, but I'm just curious if this has like an India angle to it as well. So because like it's not often talked about in Indian context, but there might be something. So Zafar, would you like to like comment on this and like answer if there's like a financial consideration for India that most people don't like look at?
Sure. So within India, I don't think finance is a big consideration. The entire process of doing an MBA in India is quite simple. If you're not going to ISB through the GMAT route, the CAT route is pretty straightforward. It's one of the it's the major reason why I chose to do an MBA in India. Other being that I did not want to go too far from my parents. So as someone mentioned earlier, like people tend to go outside when they don't have stable households or have issues within the family. I had the opposite situation, so I want to stay close to my parents. And the route to an MBA in India through CAT is pretty straightforward. You write the exam, and before when you fill up the form for the exam, you select the colleges that you want to get a call from if you get the correct sort of percentile. Then after that, if you manage to get into any IIM, and this includes the baby IIMs, like most banks will run after you with a loan without any collateral. So financing an MBA in India is not a concern. Besides, if you work for 2 or 3 years in India after graduating from Ashoka, in more often than not, you'd likely have enough money saved, especially if you work during the COVID years where most of what we earned was primarily saved. You will have enough money to finance your MBA. The most expensive IIM, I think, charges 25 lakhs for 2 years, which is not a lot compared to programs outside India. So yeah, so return on investment. So the angle of return on investment from doing an MBA in India is pretty straightforward. But you spend over 2 years, you will likely recover that in 1 year of working. So yeah, finance is not a concern if you're looking to do an MBA in India.
Thank you for the perspective, Zafar. Ratan, I think I would like to address this question to you as well, considering the United States, of course, is like a big concern in this very factor, healthcare, cost of living, etc.
Yeah, it's an expensive degree for sure. I think the rule of thumb that you can have is, can I get a job which is at least 70-80% of the loan that I'm taking? And if that is the case, like the yearly salary is what I'm talking about. So if your yearly salary is, let's say, around 200K, then you should be fine, because most of these MBAs are around 250K USD. And you should be able to pay back your loan in probably 2.5 years. It's not 1 year, as Zafar has said. This is expensive. This takes some more time, but 2.5 years is a decent amount of time to pay back your loan, most likely. One angle here, you probably may not be able to do this if you work in if you're looking for very specific firms or areas. Let's say if you're looking at startups which pays you equity, that's not helpful in paying back your loan. With respect to financing, I think loan, especially if you get into probably M5 or M7, you get an unsecured loan as well. The percentage right now is like the interest rate is quite high right now because of obvious reasons, but typically it's not too bad. Maybe 5 to 7%, 8% is typically what you'll get into. What else? So yeah, mostly your school will help you in financing. With respect to scholarships, they are not. So I think what I've heard is for Harvard and Stanford, they almost have a need blind policy. So if you get into Harvard, there's a very high likelihood that they will, finances would not be a consideration there, or may not be as important a consideration. But for other schools, the scholarship percentages depend on your profile, of course, your GMAT score and so on. But you look for other scholarships. There are a bunch of scholarships which I did not know about, but which I could have applied for, say Narottam Seskaria and a bunch of others are out there. So see if you are eligible for some of these, and their deadlines are quite early in the process, almost a year or more. So Dhirubhai Ambari scholarship, though they select very few people, but still worth exploring that. that deadline is 1.5 years almost before the program starts. So be a little more proactive and search for some of these scholarships as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ratan. Zafar, you can go first, followed by Vanshika. In the interest of time, please do keep your answers brief. Thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to add that unlike doing an MBA from outside, where placements tend to be a bit trickier, as some of you mentioned, placements from an IIM are pretty much guaranteed unless you fuck something up completely. You will get placed in a decent company at a decent salary. The other thing is that going from Ashoka to a business school like an IIM, initially you will have a sense of, I think, disappointment, or there'll be a mismatch of expectation and reality, because the sort of pedagogy that they follow here is for the lack of a better word, downgrade compared to the sort of professors we have at Ashoka. And this applies to people like this applies to the top IIMs also. I think ISB might be different in this regard, but you will feel the sense that you are studying at a government institute, even though you're paying the fees of a private college equivalent to Ashoka. So yeah, once you get past that hurdle and think of it as something transactional, where I pay this amount of money and I'm guaranteed a job that pays this much until end of 2 years, and yeah, make friends, have some fun. So it's a lot more lighter in terms of what you can expect from the program and the sort of mental pressure that you have to be under throughout the 2 years, since you're not risking a lot as you're not leaving the country. So yeah.
Thank you, Zafar. Vanshika, can you come in? Please be brief.
Yeah. So when it comes to financing, first of all, the unsecured loan that you get has a limit. Different banks have different limits, ranges from 40 lakhs to 75 lakhs. Up till that amount, you can get an unsecured loan. I think IDFC has recently started this, so they have a huge limit, which is 75. And after that, you start needing collateral. There are other ways of financing it. There's this place called Prodigy that also provides you with unsecured loan that you can pay back. There is one more, I'm forgetting the name of it, but there are several institutions like Prodigy that provide students studying abroad collateral-free loan. But they're just in different currencies. You won't get that in INR, so there's some exchange factor you have to keep in mind. You can also, there is this scholarship called the KC Mahindra Postgraduate Scholarship for Studies Abroad, where you get an 8 lakh unsecured loan. So it's basically somebody giving you cash that you have to pay back without interest. So you can explore, as long as you're borrowing less than 40,000 or less than 70,000, you can get by with just an unsecured loan, which is a great stress of your mind. The second thing is, another way of looking at it is, maybe you can apply to a school that is not that great. If you have a good scholarship there, you can often use and leverage those scholarships to negotiate with the school you desire to. That's another thing. And lastly, for women, there's this scholarship called Forte Foundation. You can't apply to it separately, but usually when you apply via college, it's a pretty generous scholarship. It gives you 100% in most cases. So that's another thing to keep in mind. That's it.
Thank you so much for the opinion. Ratan, you have a point.
One quick comment. So the limits that I think Vanshika was referring to applies to the Indian banks, not to Discovers and Junos and Prodigies. You can get all of your expenses.
No. Prodigy has a limit. They take your bank account details, and then they'll only give you, because they want to make sure that you'll be able to pay back, and they're not putting it too much of a financial burden on you. So they do have a limit.
Okay. Yeah. Then I think it's a function of your college, what kind of understanding they have with the loan provider.
It's more of a function of your finances, actually. It's more of a function of what kind of bank accounts have you been able to show. And college, of course, but if your bank account, if they say, okay, no, you can't pay it back, so then they'll give you a lesser amount. And it varies for different people. And the interest rate they charge you also varies from person to person based on your credit score and everything. Yeah.
Nisha, quick comment, but in the interest of time, of course, quick.
Yeah. So just really quickly, I think in terms of schools that offer merit scholarships versus being need blind, for example, Booth, Wharton, we've also seen a shift in terms of the kinds of profiles that they have been offering scholarships to. So we've seen an increased trend of students who've shown interest in and demonstrated work experience or extracurricular experience in sustainability and social impact doing very well in terms of scholarship at those schools, along with their high GMAT score. So if you are in that space, then, work very hard to sort of, amplify all aspects of your profile to get that scholarship.
Thank you so much, Nisha. Since I think so, I want to dial back the conversation a bit. Rangoli, you mentioned that you might be looking at a career in social impact. So in that case, I mean, for social impact as a sector, how does it look like, considering as in financial, how does financial consideration come in, if you're deciding on a career in social impact, considering they might not have as high a pay as, say, the typical MBA job, which is sales or investment banking or consulting?
So I think it's important to clarify what social impact means. It's not a monolith, right? Not everyone in social impact is doing the same kind of thing. You have everything from, maybe grassroots level development to, social impact consulting practices of places like McKinsey, which pay very, very well. So I think when talking about ROI, or when talking about, whether MBA is the right path to social impact, being specific about what you mean when you say social impact, being specific about what you want to do in social impact makes a big difference, right? So to what Ratan said, right in the beginning, that if you want to do social impact, maybe MBA is not the right choice. I think it depends on what you want to do in social impact, right? Do you want to run a boutique advisory firm in sort of ESG or in DEI, right? Maybe that has potential to make you more money than if you're doing grassroots level development, right? So what you're doing, really, the amount of difference it makes is not money. So I don't think it's quite as cut and dry as social impact means you're not going to make any money. There is money to be made and good to be done.
Definitely interesting insight. Thank you so much, Rangoli, for that. So yes, so regarding financial consideration and particularly scholarships, since we were on that topic, so so I think we have already gone on the path of how to pursue scholarships, and there's some opportunities that are there. But there are some factors, for example, the GMAT score. How much of, say, GMAT score or any other factor of your application weigh in on your chances of getting a scholarship? Because I believe scholarship process might differ largely, not largely, but to some extent, from your MBA application process. So apart from GMAT score or any other part of your application, how does that weigh in on your chances of getting a scholarship? Ratan, can you take this question, since you are a Mittal family scholar at Wharton?
Yeah, though that scholarship is not that fancy, the name is more fancy. I think high GMAT is definitely something that these schools are looking for. It helps them in boosting up their profile. And it's also a very sort of solid indication that you'll be able to handle the academics really well and do well academically. So plus the firms, your resume often has an entry of your GMAT score as well, especially if it's more than 750. So considering all these aspects, I think it's very important in my mind. So, I mean, if you can get a 780, that's great, but not everyone can do that. That's also fine, but definitely have a score more than 750. If you have anything 760 and beyond, your chance of getting some scholarship at least, or good scholarship as well in many cases, as Nisha was talking about, social impact, if you have those elements as well in your profile, 760 possibly is a score to target. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ratan. So yeah, there's a very particular target set, and not a low one at that. So yes, important point to consider. So before we move on to the next session, so I believe Zafar's Zafar, I think you're on limited time right now. So thank you so much, Zafar, for attending the session. Really do appreciate your insights. Thank you for giving the Indian MBA insight, which is relatively grossly underrepresented, considering a lot of our talk has been about GMAT and schools abroad. But Zafar, thank you so much. The opinions you made were really, really important, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was great interacting with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Zafar. Goodbye. All right, Deshna, you may take over.
Yeah. So our next section is about the application process. the first question that comes in is, what is an ideal timeline to start one's homework about the application process, R1 versus R2? How early should one start? Perhaps their GMAT, perhaps their SOP. Yeah, anyone who wants to pitch in.
Okay, I'll take this question. So just in terms of, see, you have to ensure that you have the basics set for your application process, right? So you need to give yourself at least, 4.5 months, if not more, to work on the application essays. And like reasonably, we do target applying to at least 4 schools in a round. And if you can do more, that's great, but at least doing justice to 4 schools that you've thought about, and if you feel it's actually a good fit for you. So just keeping that time frame in mind, you should ensure that your GMAT score is done and your GMAT test has been completed before that. So let's say if you're applying in the fall, if you're applying for round 1, then you should be done with your GMAT by, let's say, February or March, so that you can start the application process by then. For those of you who will be applying for deferred MBA applications, and I have to say that, majority of the deferred MBA crowd comes from the IITs and not Ashoka. And I feel, terrible about that, because I think Ashoka students should be more represented in the deferred applicant pool, because it really is a great way to just lock in your seat a few years in advance. And let's say if a school like a Kellogg or a Booth works out for you, then you have a shot at applying again as a regular MBA applicant, a few years after you have worked. So you could apply to a better school, let's say a Wharton or a GSB or a Harvard, if you have a, another M7 admit in your bag. So just, get the GMAT out of the way. I've seen so many applicants get stuck on the GMAT score, and they're in that frenzy of sort of taking that GMAT test in the middle of the application process, and it really weighs very heavily, and it does cause stress to applicants, because if you don't have that score of, let's say 750 plus, and Indian applicants do need to have a higher GMAT score, compared to other students for the nationality. So if you haven't taken that test in advance, then it does sort of start to eat into the time that you're going to be spending on your application. So just ensure that you don't compromise the quality of your applications because you haven't taken the GMAT in advance.
Deshna, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Nisha. Rangoli, do you want to question? Yeah.
So I agree completely with everything Nisha said, because I did none of it, and it was very, very stressful for me applying to business school. And I'll give you an example. So the Oxford deadline was the round 2 deadline, which is when I applied, was the first week of October, and I decided to apply in the second half of August. At which point I had given neither the GMAT, nor had I looked at the questions, nor had I approached any of the people who'd be writing recommendations for me. Would not recommend. So the sooner you get started, the better it is. But also, if you're feeling like it's July and you missed the boat, you haven't, it's just going to be much harder. Right? So it's really about sort of, if you'll be able to prioritize your mental health, you'll be able to sort of have a social life, you'll be able to focus at work much better the sooner you start. But it's still not too late, right? You just need to put in more effort if you've missed sort of the March or the Jan Feb board to give your GMAT.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rangoli. That was very insightful. Vanshika, do you want to add in?
Yes. So I would say definitely 4 months is a good timeline, mostly because when you're writing an essay, when the admissions person at the other end is reading, they have to see your story make sense. They can understand, okay, this is the kind of person that you are, and this is why you're making these choices. Every single one of your essays has to read like a coherent story to telling what you are as a person. So oftentimes you have to ruminate and maybe think and rethink on the topics that you've chosen to talk about in your essays and how the story is playing out. So just sitting on your essays is what is important to do, and which is why the time you need. The essays, I mean, if you just had to write the essays, you could obviously write it in a day, but it's the rumination that helps. Another thing I would also recommend is when you're writing your essays, whether you've taken a counselor, whether you have an alumni guiding you, it is also very important to maybe have somebody you know really well, who maybe a friend or somebody in your family who knows you, have them go through the essay. And sometimes they're able to bring out insights about yourself that you haven't noticed. So that is very useful. Another thing I would like to add about the application process, if now, given that it's July, and you really want to apply this year itself, don't panic. I think there's still a chance. Even I, like Rangoli, even I applied. I decided September end I wanted to do an MBA, and I took the GMAT in 1 month, and then I wrote my essays in another month. So you can still do it. It will be a very stressful time. So you'll have to ride through the stress, but it's still possible. So also, last thing, don't select yourself out of any school, please don't do that. Even if you have a low GMAT score, even if you think you don't have enough social impact background, do not select yourself out. If you want to apply somewhere, apply it, give it your best shot. You cannot regret later, what if I had applied to that school? The only reason I would say you shouldn't apply to a certain school is, for example, you just have 1 week to apply. There are 2 deadlines. One is a great school and one is a not so great school, and you're thinking you don't have enough time to apply to both. Apply for one where you think you have a better chance, if you want to absolutely do an MBA this year. But there's no other reason for you to self-select out. Also, if you can afford it, the funds and everything also have to be kept in mind. Yeah, but please do not select yourself out of anything. Give it a shot.
Thank you so much, Vanshika.
Yeah.
And we know that you're short on time and you want to leave right now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you so much. And so nice of you, Deshna, to do this. It's so great to have a community who can help you. I have received a lot from Ashoka, and this is a great thing that you're doing. And thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Ratan next, and then we'll have Nisha.
Yeah, so I think take your time, don't get rushed into this. I took almost probably 1.5 years to think through the entire process. I was thinking of applying a year earlier than I actually did. And then I realized that I do not have enough clarity on why I want to do an MBA and what is my short-term, long-term goal, etc. In fact, this came from Nisha's firm, Admissions Gateway, and then they took a look at my profile and suggested that I probably work a little more, figure some more things out about what I like and do not like, and so on. So that is one. Secondly, just feel a lot of people talk about round 1, round 2, etc. I think my sense here is that do apply to some schools in round 1, even if you don't feel very confident about your profile and essays and so on. The only consideration there would be not having a GMAT or GRE score. If you don't have a score which is decent, like 730 and above, or equivalent in GRE, then you might consider not applying. But otherwise, do apply just to get a sense of how your essays are coming out and what is that process like, how does it feel, etc. And hopefully you will also have an offer by the end of round 1. And if you feel that you'll be more comfortable applying in round 2, take your time and come out with maybe better scores or better recommendations, or some more experience, more clarity on your essays and so on. Yeah, thanks.
Just to Ratan's point, like he's saying, don't rush into the process and don't rush yourself, because there is a learning curve to the application process. And often your first essays are not your best essays, because you have to learn how to sort of write them and convince yourself and the reader about why you want to pursue the MBA. But on the flip side is also the fact that, we've seen so many miraculous stories also along the way. And just to give you a couple of examples, we had a candidate last year who applied in round 1 to, what were his dream schools, and didn't make it because he had a lower GPA, and he was a reapplicant actually. So in round 2, he retook the GMAT, got a 770, and then went to Wharton with a 100K scholarship. So and that GMAT attempt was a day before the round 2 deadline. So we've seen situations where, candidates can really turn things around for themselves because the story is great. They're just missing their GMAT score. So again, don't lose heart. We've also, sort of executed applications in 4 days. Again, do not recommend that because it's extreme, stress on everybody involved. But these things do happen because life does not always pan out the way you want it to pan out. But at least try your best to strategize your time frame and make the most of the time that you have in the weeks before the application deadline, especially if you know you want to apply. Don't procrastinate, I think. That's the most important thing.
Quick comment on just probably 10-second comment on those of you who are like me in terms of being perfectionist or looking for the very, very high bar and then procrastinating because of that. I think 80-90%, probably even 75% of what you are expecting from the process, if you are at that level, you should apply. Don't hold yourself back. Take the chance to apply in the first round and get some experience. You'll also move forward in the learning curve that Nishal was talking about. Yeah, don't miss that boat.
I also just want to add something very quickly, Deshna. I just again, 20 seconds. Like Ratan was saying earlier, applying to lower ranked schools, maybe, or schools that you think might be your safety schools in the first round, if you're still building towards your application. So apply when you're ready and submit only a high quality application. That's something we stress on really heavily, that don't just apply because deadlines there, wait for round 2 if you're not ready yet. But especially for programs, for example, which have early action sort of provisions like Darden or Duke, for example, can be a great way to also sort of build your own credibility for negotiations in the scholarship process, especially if you're applying for round 2. So let's say you miss round 1 for other schools, but you're applying to easier schools for which you have a more competitive profile, then you can use them as a bargaining chip with other schools in round 2 if you want to avail more scholarships. So it's definitely useful to, apply to some schools in round 1 if you're ready.
Thank you so much. Tanvi, would you want to pitch in something related to ISB and how different rounds sort of affect your admission as well as perhaps scholarships?
Right. So ISB has very few scholarships to offer. It has a few full scholarships as well, which it offers only in round 1. So if you want to, try for that, you have to apply in round 1. And the number of scholarships that are given out does decrease in round 2, and that is true for other schools as well outside India. So I think you should aim for round 1 if you are serious, but if you are not ready, like the other panelists like Nisha or Ratan have already highlighted, like if you're not ready, do not fill in the substandard, like not up to the mark application. So right, so if you are applying to the earlier round, it does help, and that is true for ISB as well.
Thank you so much. My next question is, how much do admission counselors help with nailing that dream admit? And perhaps what options does one have if their fees cannot be afforded by them? Rangoli, would you want to pitch in here?
Sure. So I did have an admissions counselor, and I think the process is as valuable as the effort you put into it. So these are, they're not going to write the essay for you. They're not going to, it's not their application, right? It's your application. So you have to be putting in 100% for you to be able to get anything out of it. And you also, I think, need to have clear goals about what it is you want out of it, right? For me, my biggest sort of thing was that I'm a huge procrastinator. So I just needed someone to sort of sit on my head and say that, you need to finish your resume today. You need to get this LOR done. All the more because I was working on an accelerated timeline. So for me, it was helpful that, someone who sort of had the lay of the land, knew all the different pieces that had to go into an MBA application, because it really is a lot of things. You say GMAT score, you say letters of recommendation, you say essays, which can be anywhere from one statement of purpose to like 8-9 shorter pieces. Test scores, maybe in English proficiency test score, things like that. It's a lot of stuff that you have to juggle, and you also have a life. Maybe you're also working. So for me, I don't really have any insight on the cost part of your question, but I think it's helpful as long as you know that you still have to do the work. They're not going to do the work for you. And you have to be clear about what it is you want out of that relationship, because they can be very, very helpful, but you have to let them be, and you have to tell them, this is what I want from you. That's, I think, the only way that works.
Sorry, Deshna, yeah.
Anyone else who wants to pitch in, perhaps very briefly, as we are already at Ratan, Tanvi, anyone who has worked with a counselor, or perhaps if not, what are the other alternatives did you take?
Okay.
I think counselor, sorry, Ratan, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tanvi, you go ahead.
I think working with a counselor can be really helpful, especially for applications for the schools abroad, because the process can be very overwhelming and complicated, as we have already discussed. So, and since counselor, they have seen so many applicants going through that process, and what is, to really bring that story out from your profile. Working with a counselor helps in that. I did work with a counselor to chart that story out. You can take a few sessions if you don't have like funds for a longer kind of consultation. But even in few sessions with the counselor, you can chart out that story for yourself, and then work for the essays, and work with the friends that who have already made to those programs, if they can review the essays for you. That can be one way. But I would recommend working with a counselor. That really helps, because I had applied earlier as well, but I'd applied myself, and I could see the difference in applying without the help of a counselor and with the help of a counselor.
Right. Thank you so much, Tanvi. Next question we have in the section is about approaching people for getting letter of recommendation. There were attendees who perhaps feel they're introverted, they're perhaps lost touch with their professors, their previous managers, burned bridges. So in such cases, how do you get to a point where you're able to get a good LOI? And how was the process like for you guys? Anyone? Ratan, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I can chip in. So I think one thing which is important in terms of the mindset that you have when approaching these people is that you are asking for a favor, yes, but they will also feel good to see you succeed, and they are also, I mean, unless you had a fight or the relationship was not that great, even if it was a normal working relationship, they will also feel in a way honored to write a LOR for you, and especially if you get into a good university after that, it's a matter of pride almost for them as well. So don't just think about the aspect of asking for favor, but also think about you valuing that relationship almost, and you almost saying that, okay, I have faith in how it worked out, and you know me, and you can write good things about me. So I think that is in terms of mindset. In terms of how you actually work out, I think it depends on your nature of relationship with the person. If you have an informal kind of relationship as well outside of the formal relationships, you can be frank, you can discuss your essays, and what you write in the LOR as well, and so on. If not, in most cases, these are busy people. These are most likely senior people, at least of a US senior to you. So it is also fine to just to have a conversation, do some writing on their behalf, see if that is what they would want to, they're okay with, and just help them out in the process. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ratan. Nisha, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a point about, how like one can go about availing the services of a counseling firm if you don't have the funds for it. So I know for a fact, like our firm has a CSR, arm where we often provide piecemeal, sort of consulting services to people who can't afford to pay. And we've done, pro bono, like completely pro bono cases end to end as well for, students coming in from rural backgrounds who've done really well and really broken the mold, through their education, and are looking to sort of, seek like beyond what India has to offer. So, and also, I mean, there are firms that also offer, let's say, like services, for example, webinars, which you can attend, which are not as expensive as the entire consulting process. So there are ways of, depending on what you're looking for, there are ways of seeking subsidized ways to sort of get that, advice that you're looking for.
Thank you so much. This is helpful. Anyone else wants to pitch in? Otherwise, we move to the next section. So yeah, we are towards the end of this, and this is one of the questions that one of the panelists asked us to add. and which is the pain of the process, especially for people who are going abroad, right? The financing of it, shifting countries, leaving your family, your spouse perhaps, missing home, your visa issues, the job market is fluctuating. So how do you sort of manage in these situations? And what has your experiences been? Rangoli, if you want to start here.
I think I'll pass on this question because I haven't yet gone. So a lot of the posts, having to leave family, it's all sort of happening for me right now. So I don't think I'm in a good place, I think, to answer this question.
Got
Yeah, I thought I can go last, but I think we have covered enough of it. Especially Zafar had some very useful points to talk about being away from the family, and he has made a very clear choice, which is great. But I think my point is to just stress that this will it's not an easy process. Both the application as well as especially if you're going abroad to a new country, do not have a lot of exposure to that place. That will take a little while of adjustment. For the first 6 months, I was always like, why am I here? This is the question that I'll ask myself every second day. Now it is to the point that, okay, now some things are making sense. I like some courses, the internship is going well. I finally have an internship. And my partner also managed to come here. So that also worked out. But that may not be the case for all of us, and be open to some of that pain, some of that risk. Stuff like, say, you might feel like having a pani puri once in a while, but there's no place possibly in Philadelphia where you can do that. And those things are real, and you can only experience them once you are outside of your country or your people. So just be aware of those pains as well as you plan. Be resilient. In the long term, this will surely pay off. In the short while, be ready for some tough times, maybe. Yeah.
Anyone else who wants to pitch in?
I think one factor that really helps is a lot of self-awareness in this whole process, because there are many kind of risks that are involved. There are financial risks, there is job opportunity related risk. If there is a support system that you may have in a country outside India, that can be really a good factor for you to consider that geography. But it also comes down to your personal appetite of risk taking. So you should be very aware of what is your appetite of taking risk, and what do you really want out of this, right? So if you're clear about your values, your vision, and your risk appetite, I think that also become a part of the equation while applying.
Thank you. Mayur, do you want to take this over?
Yes, thank you, Deshna. So with this, we bring this webinar to an end. It's been a while since we've been chatting about this, and I think a lot of insights were shared today. A lot that the audience will surely appreciate. Audience, do not worry. If you missed out any of the core points, since there is a recording, we will make it available in due course. But most importantly, we have an interactive Q&A session right after this. It's on a separate Zoom link. You would have seen it either in your email invite or on the Ashoka Higher Ed group on WhatsApp. So if you have questions, pertinent questions for the panelists to answer, you can ask them one-on-one about this. So please feel free to join on the Zoom link right after. We will begin shortly. Panelists, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate your time. Also, big thank you to Vanshika and Zafar who are not here. But most importantly, without you guys, this session could not have happened. Thank you for being so generous with your time, your knowledge, and even the pain that that you undertook to to go through an MBA journey. And wishing everybody who joined this all the best for their journey ahead, whether it's choosing to do an MBA or otherwise as well. And yes, thank you so much for joining in. We hope you enjoyed this session, and please keep an eye for more news from us. For now, please do try to join in for the interactive Q&A right after this webinar.
Just to add, we would be collating some of the resources and scholarships that our panelist told us about, and perhaps circulating it, as well as we would be having other sessions about other education streams, as well as perhaps live post MBA talking to people who have worked for 4 or 5 years in different geographies. So we are trying to make this happen. It will take some time, but we really hope you guys will join.
All right. So with that, like I will end this session, and like panelists who do have the extra time, please do try to join for the interactive session, and we will field some questions there before we wrap it up at like 8 p.m. sharp India time. Thank you so much, guys. And like attendees who are still around and are coming for the Q&A session, please do join in a few minutes. Thank you so much and goodbye.